of the best cowbell songs ever in the history of rock and roll. You can't do that. And I think it's kind of apropos for our next guest. This man has chronicled the plight of pre-1980 Major League Baseball players who have not received anywhere near, in my humble estimation, a fair share of the pie for their years of play. For being a Major League Baseball player in a time when maybe there wasn't a great deal of expansion, or certainly not as much as there is right now, and find players who did not survive the time needed to qualify for a pension under then existing rules, who are now suffering financially because of that. I'm about to introduce to you Doug Gladstone, the author of A Bitter Cup of Coffee. Doug is a pension expert who has chronicled this plight over the years and who's crusaded for these players, a lot of whom have been guests on my show and have become in our sports show, Monday Night Sports, and become friends over the year. And when Doug said, I'm looking to come on to talk about this with anybody, I said, we're here, and so is Doug. Doug, how are you? Happy New Year.
I'm very happy to be on the show, Tony. Thank you very kindly, and belated happy and a healthy and a joyous new year to you and your audience.
Oh, it's for each and every one of us. And I can tell you what little I know here. I imagine in 1947 there was a number of Major League players who thought they should have a pension. And players played for many years. It was the reserve clause system. And players mustered out of baseball and did whatever they could for a job. And now we have a number of baseball players, you say there's 800, who have been more or less kind of shorted on the breadline when it comes to pensions. We spoke in the Carmen Fan Zone in the past. We've had several others who missed, like Maxwell Smart, they missed it by that much. And what got you started on this, and what are the issues as you are seeing it?
Well, Tony, to quote my favorite fictional New York City detective, I'm just a fly in the ointment. I'm just a monkey in the wrench. I'm just a smartass, Lieutenant John McClane, and really, not to make light of this situation, but there are so many, and a lot of these men are my friends. There are so many sports writers out there who aren't doing their job. Sports is an interesting, sports writing rather, the field of sports writing is an interesting occupation. You're a fan of the games you cover. You can't say that if you're an obituary writer. Sports writers, particularly baseball columnists, they'll go to a game on their day off. An obituary writer is not going to hang out at a funeral parlor. So I just believe that whether or not they're fearful of having their press credentials revoked, whether or not they just want to, eat that good old clubhouse chow after a game, or rather they just don't know about the issue. There is an appalling lack of reporting going on, and I don't know why I was lucky enough to uncover this story. The story has been out there for a very long time. If you recall, when we first met, I was doing a sports article for Baseball Digest, and Jimmy Qualls, the little-known, obscure
a legend or in reverse to New York Met fans.
Yeah, exactly. Who broke up Tom Seaver's bid for a perfect game on July 9th, 1969. Jimmy, if he doesn't tell me that he's not getting a pension, I don't do the story. So let's give your listeners some context. Yes, on April 1st, no fool, in 1947, the Players Pension Fund was established. At that point in time, you needed 5 years of eligibility. In 1969, so we fast forward 22 years, that threshold was lowered to 4 years. Now, before I move on, a lot of what I'll call pre-1947 players, the most notable of whom was 1941 National League MVP Dolph Camilli, when he found out that he wasn't eligible for a pension because he had retired from the sport prior to April 1, 1947, he really threw a hissy fit. And he basically said, what, I didn't attempt to grow the game, I didn't contribute to this great game that I love and that I played so well. And sure enough, in October 1997, the Executive Council of Major League Baseball, meeting in Scottsdale, Arizona, gave all those men who played prior to 1947, I won't call them pensions, I'll call them disbursements.
Stipends.
Or just payments.
Yeah.
Now, here's the key thing. These men were given monies without paying union dues. I want you and your listeners to remember
I'm writing that in my notes. Please continue.
Okay. So we've got it to 1969. The threshold is lowered, as I said, to 4 years. And then in 1980, if you recall, there was a Memorial Day strike that was narrowly averted. The late Ray Grebe, who was the negotiator.
Yeah, I went to school with his daughter.
Major League Baseball?
Yeah.
From Connecticut, I believe.
Right, yeah. GE. Yeah.
And the late Marvin Miller, who I had the pleasure of speaking with on Veterans Day in 2009, they, in order to avert the strike, they came up with this unique proposal. And very simply, it was as follows. Moving forward, every player in 1980 and subsequent years only needed one game day to be eligible for the league's umbrella health insurance plan, and 43 game days to be eligible for a pension. Now, why do I say game days? Because when you're on the roster, if you're a first baseman or a second baseman or an outfielder, you're going to play probably every day. But if you're a pitcher, like Justin Verlander or Max Scherzer, in 43 game days, you're going to be credited with 43 game days, but you're only going to play probably 7 or 8 of those games.
Okay, if I can clarify here for my own purposes, is a game day time on a roster as opposed to appearance?
That is correct.
Okay.
So, in other words, you could be riding the pines. You could be the last person on the bench, the proverbial 25th man, and if you're on that roster, you're credited with a game day. So, a Scherzer or a Matt Harvey or a Noah Syndergaard or a Verlander, they're credited with 43 game days, even though they probably will take the field only 8 times.
Right,
in
starting
43 game
appearances.
days. Now, that's wonderful. And he's deceased. He's not here to defend himself. There's a school of thought that says labor economists like the late Marvin Miller, you have to do what's best for your dues-paying members. I get that. I really do. A lot of people feel that I don't know what the purpose of a union is. I actually do. But I'm also of the belief that when you've got this, and we're talking about an almost $10 billion industry that's fueled largely by licensing monies that networks like ESPN and TBS pay Major League Baseball, when you've got this almost $10 billion industry, you can afford to be more charitable. You can afford not to throw people a bone. So the monies that in April of 2011, largely as a result of my book and a lot of key players behind the scenes, the monies that were given to these pre-1980 non-vested pensionless men were nowhere near the $210,000 that the Internal Revenue Service says you can earn up to in terms of a yearly defined benefit
plan, right?
Correct.
Now,
these men are not even coming close to it. And unless you want me to pause right now, if you want to ask a question, I was going to.
No, please go ahead.
Your listeners,
I will remember.
The formula was.
Sure.
Okay. Essentially, for every quarter a man plays, and a quarter is defined as 43 game days, up to 16 quarters or 4 years, that man is going to get $625. So they put qualifications on it. That's number one. Number two, the payment. I don't know any men who are getting $10,000. Don Dillard, who played for the Milwaukee Braves,
yeah,
and the Cleveland Indians,
pinch hitter,
17 game days shy of a pension. So his gross check is about $9,350. And then Major League Baseball has the audacity to take taxes out of that money. So he probably comes home with about $7,500, $7,300 every year. Meanwhile, a man who, again, since 1980, all you needed is that 43 game days, a man who is sitting on the bench gets that pension right. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples. These are in no particular order, but it is just shocking to me that who's getting a pension these days based upon, and of course, right now my notes are a little verklempt, so you'll pardon me.
That's okay.
All right. So here we are. I'll give you an example. Somebody like me, being a Met fan, I should know this off the top of my head. Kelvin Torvey. I don't know if any of your listeners remember Kelvin Torvey. He was a former Twins and Mets first baseman. He played parts of 3 seasons in 1988, 1990, 1991. He appeared in only 42 game days of action. He came to the plate 62 times. He collected 14 hits. He gets a pension. But men like Rich Hinton, with all over 3.5 years service credit, David Clyde, the former flamethrower for the Texas
the phenom.
Don Dillard, who's got 3 3/4 years, Steve Grilly, the father of Toronto Blue Jays relief pitcher Jason Grilly, he only is credited with 2 1/4 years. George Nestor Theodore of the Mets, Dave Schenk of the Mets, the list goes on and on. These men are only earning $625 per quarter. Now, and again, that's before taxes are taken out. But Torvey gets a pension. It may not be a big pension because he didn't play a lot.
Right.
His final average salary isn't going to be very much. But the bottom line is, when we don't wish him any ill will, when Torve passes on, that payment is going to be able to be passed on to his designated survivors.
Because it's a qualified plan.
Loved ones. And he gets health coverage. The men who are the pre-1980 players, when, God forbid, Carmen Fanzone or Don Dillard pass on, that money that Carmen Fanzone is receiving is not going to go to his beautiful and talented wife, the the Grammy Award-nominated singer, Sue Rainey.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the issue in a nutshell.
Now,
I think there's a tremendous inequity about that.
In the materials that you had sent over to me, you had mentioned Tony Clark, who, by all intents and purposes, at least in the mainstream media, is considered to be, a wonderful guy, top shelf, intelligent, great administrator, on and on and on and on. And one of the things which you had told me is this was a man that in his position could have done something about this and chose not to. Can you elaborate on that, please, Doug?
Well, I don't know why Mr. Clark. I've never had the pleasure of meeting him. Always liked him when he was with the Tigers.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely was crazy about him when he came to New York, first for the Mets and then for the Yankees. But he is the executive director, as you and your listeners probably know, of the Major League Baseball Players Association. And the arrangement that went into effect in April of 2011, it wasn't his doing, per se. The late Michael Weiner, who passed away tragically of I believe, a brain tumor or brain cancer. The late Michael Weiner put this into play. And the simple fact is that I thought, since Mr. Clark is the first ever former player to be the executive director of the Players Association, the late Marvin Miller and Don Fear and Michael Weiner, they weren't players. Fear, Weiner were attorneys. And, of course, Marvin was a labor economist.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Tony Clark, we have high hopes for him. When I say we, all the ball players were affected.
Someone who would be sympathetic to players.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for full transparency's sake, when you are no longer a dues-paying member of a union, you are not owed what is called the duty of fair representation. So Tony Clark, you'll pardon the pun, doesn't have to go to bat for these retired players.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said at the outset, any union leader worth their salt only has to really take care
of the folks in front of
their
them.
dues-paying members. Again, Mr. Clark doesn't owe these guys anything, but I really believe in the philosophy of the Three Musketeers: all for one and one for all. And you can't know where you're going until you know where you've been. These were men, and pardon me if I sound like I'm on my soapbox, these were ball players who endured labor stoppages, who went out on strike. You're old enough, like I am, to recall the picket lines in 1972.
I do.
These were men who went out on strike so that today's ball players can earn these obscene salaries. Now, I don't begrudge Yoenis Cespedes his $108 million contract. I don't begrudge Matt Holliday his $13 million contract. And I certainly don't begrudge, the Cy Young, everyone's favorite. I was about to say Oral Hershiser. I'm certainly wrong. The Dodgers ace Clayton Kershaw.
Clayton Kershaw.
I don't begrudge him his 31.7. Specifically, he's going to be making $31.17 million this year. But when I hear numbers like that, and when then you compare and contrast those numbers to the $625 a quarter that men like Clyde and Dillard and
And
Fanzone and Grilly are earning, something is clearly wrong. I don't know what that is.
Well,
if our listeners want to email Tony Clark, it's tonyc@mlbpa.org, and they can broach the question with them. We know you don't have to give these guys the duty of fair representation, but come on, there's more than enough money to go around, unless the union is afraid that slicing up their cut of the pie is going to hurt their current members. I don't see why they can't increase these payments.
Well, in our closing moments together, I've got one question and one suggestion, and my suggestion is would it really hurt Major League Baseball and all of baseball and all of the affiliates of baseball to set aside 1 day's gate, just 1 day, and put that into a private foundation and annuitize it for the benefit of these old players? To me, it would seem like an absolute no-brainer and a wonderful gesture, and I've never heard anything like this even breathed about. And I'm taking you haven't either.
I have not. I like the merits of it. Obviously, you'd have to flesh out the proposal a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I'd want to hear details first. But yes, the gates that, 15, there were 30 teams, right? So the gates of 15 stadiums could be, the net receipts could be considerable. And I know all the baseball fans out there, hopefully they're going to agree that something should be done for these men. Now, I have had my own modest proposals, which I think you're aware of. I'm a pragmatist. I don't believe these men are ever going to be retroactively restored into pension coverage, though any employment law specialist will tell you it's legally possible. The next CBA doesn't come up for ratification until 2021, and if Tony Clark and his opposite number, Rob Manfred, want to restore these men into pension coverage, they can do it. I don't think they're going to do it, but I know they can do it. Mm-hmm. Short of that, I've come up with my own proposals. Since, as I mentioned, the pre-1947 players were getting quarterly payments of $7,500 to $10,000 a year.
Without paying dues.
Without paying dues, thank you. You've read your briefing material. That's the least, the very least, these men should be getting. Do you think a guy who graduated Arlington High School, he's a former Texas Ranger and Oakland Athletic, he's from Medford, Massachusetts, the versatile utility player, Jimmy Driscoll. Do you think he's coming home with $31.17 million like Clayton Kershaw is? No. Jimmy, who lives in Conway, New Hampshire, Jimmy is coming home every year after taxes are taken out with a meager $1,500. Do you know what he did with his first $1,500, Tony?
I do not know.
He paid his hot water heating bill.
Oh, please.
Okay? I think at the very least you can increase, that payment, number one. Number two, have a heart. I just spoke to the widow of former Washington Senator and Detroit Tiger pitcher Alan Koch. She says that if that payment is taking it away from her, it's going to be a real financial hardship.
Sure.
A real financial hardship.
Sure.
So why penalize the designated survivors and the loved ones and family of these men for an error in judgment that was made back in 1980?
And believe me, I'd like to have you on again, Doug, because there's a couple of other thoughts that I have about things that which I will share with you by email, and perhaps if these thoughts germinate between us, I think it's something I would like to propose to the listeners, because I think this is just a tragedy and a travesty. And believe it or not, we're entirely out of time. Quickly, can you tell our friends and our fans where to reach you if they'd like to find out more about what's happening with these older pre-1980 players?
Sure. They can shoot me an email at abittercupofcoffee@gmail.com. That's A Bitter Cup of Coffee. That's the title of my 2010 book, A Bitter Cup of Coffee@gmail.com. I will be more than happy to answer any of their concerns and questions.
Doug, thank you so much. Happy New Year. And this is something that really needed to get out there, and we did it tonight and could not have done it without your help. Thanks again. Happy New Year again.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for offering me the slot and for affording me the opportunity to inform and educate people. Because you're right, I don't think the average fan knows diddly squat about this.
No, and it's terrible. Thanks so much, and take care.
You too. Bye now.
Bye now. And that was Doug Gladstone, author of A Bitter Cup of Coffee. Oh, what a terrible story that is. We're going to be coming right back with